Ladies and gentlemen, again, please welcome Isabelle Bajou, Dean of the Tepper School.
Well, good afternoon again. Sorry to interrupt the very lively conversations. I hope you enjoyed the first session as much as I did. At this time, we would like to celebrate our proud legacy of Nobel Laureates in economics with ties to Carnegie Mellon and with the Tepper School. We currently have 10 Nobel Laureates with ties to the school, and nearly half of the university's Nobel Prizes came from the Tepper School. In addition to our featured speakers for this session, we are fortunate to have another one of those Nobel Prize winners participating in our symposium, Lars Peter Hansen. Lars was a faculty member here at the Tepper School from 1978 to 1981. Those were formative years where he began developing groundbreaking analytical methods in economics. He won the Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences in 2013 for his work in developing statistical methods for analyzing asset prices, particularly pricing for stocks. He made a lasting impact both here and in the field of economics as a whole. Although Lars will be joining us virtually for his session, I wanted to extend a special thanks to him for his contributions to our school and to the fields of economics. At this time, I would like to invite Ariel Zetlin-Jones, Associate Professor of Economics, to the stage to introduce Dr. Thomas Sargent, winner of the Nobel Prize of Economics. Ariel?
Thank you, Dean Bajou. It's a privilege to stand before such a distinguished gathering of university leadership, Tepper faculty, staff, students, alumni, our former faculty friends, and members of the broader CMU community. Today, I have the incredible honor of introducing our plenary speaker, Thomas Sargent, Nobel Laureate and William R. Berkeley Professor of Economics and Business at New York University. Simply put, Tom is one of the most important and influential thinkers in macroeconomic policy of the last 50 years. It is profoundly fitting that we celebrate a scholar of his caliber at this anniversary celebration. A common theme in the research paradigm that has powered GSIA and the Tepper School's impact on society and policy is the critical role that structural models play in helping us to organize our knowledge. This ethos is at the heart of Tom's work, and indeed much of the research that continues to emerge from the Tepper School today. Tom was awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics for showing how to use structural frameworks to accurately assess the consequences of macroeconomic policy. Using economic theory to better understand the empirical consequences of policy was not an obvious approach to do this analysis back in 1966 when Tom first visited what was then Carnegie Tech. This was, again, as we heard from Holger, the time when Robert Lucas was working on his famous Lucas critique work when Tom was here. But using structural frameworks to evaluate macroeconomic policy is how this type of analysis should be conducted. And in today's era of rapid technological change, I think it's worth pausing for a moment to remember why this is the case. We live in a world of ever-increasing data, ever more powerful statistical tools like machine learning and AI that can help us and do help us process this large data. And often we may feel inclined today to consider the possibility that big data alone and large statistical models will suffice to get to the answers of important questions in society and policy. Let me quote the editor of one of the most prestigious journals in economics. Statistical information is currently accumulating at an unprecedented rate, but no amount of statistical information, however complete and exact, by itself can explain economic phenomena. These changes in data and statistical models feel very recent, but this inclination to rely on statistics alone is not new. The quote I just read to you is actually from 1933. That editor's message resonates even more today than it did almost 100 years ago. And Tom's body of work highlights exactly why structure and models are so necessary for understanding economic history. Can we understand the effects of large-scale changes in government policy say a large increase in government spending only with a statistical analysis of the historical record. Well, one challenge with this approach is that macroeconomic policy changes are often themselves caused by underlying large-scale economic events. We know governments are more likely to engage in large-scale spending changes when the economy is experiencing a downturn. And so what this means is that the data we observe bundles up the underlying economic shocks, households and firms' expectations of how the government is likely to respond, along with the government change we're trying to study. Throughout his career, across a range of key policy priorities, including monetary and fiscal policy, Tom has explained to us why we must impose structure to sort out the effects of underlying shocks, expectations from the policies we're trying to better understand. Even better, Tom has advanced the structural tools we need to actually accomplish this task, to provide accurate policy guidance. Let me conclude with a brief recent anecdote from a recent meeting with Tom. I was explaining a research project of mine that straddles computer science, engineering, and economics. This is, of course, CMU. And I described how I was considering adapting my research a bit to better speak to the issues or worries that my computer scientists and engineering colleagues have. And on hearing this, Tom looked at me and said, well, you have to do the research you believe it should be done. You have to do the research the way you believe it should be done. I cannot imagine a better way to describe Tom than as an economist who conducts research the way he believes it should be done. Those instincts and his work have significantly improved economic knowledge and policymaking. Tom, on behalf of the Tepper faculty, and especially my fellow economists, many of whom are here in this room, we are so delighted that you wish to highlight your ties to Carnegie Mellon. And we're honored to be able to include your portrait with those of our other Nobel laureates. Will you all please join me in welcoming Thomas Sargent?
Okay. So here's what I'm going to do. I personally knew, and all the people who are on that wall, those portraits. So I'm going to tell you, and I benefited from knowing them. So I'm going to tell you a little bit less well than you did about my perceptions of what I learned from them and what they did. That's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to go in order, and what I see is I'm a product of having known them, and I work on artificial intelligence, which I think is data compression, generalization, and decisions, making decisions. I work on macro, which is about prosperity, and with Lars Hansen, I think about entrepreneurship and what it is in a long tradition. I'm going to tell you why I think about those things is because I knew those people. I still know Lars. So the first is Herb Simon. Okay, so what did he do? He did his political science PhD, and it showed. He did non-axiomatic decision theory. He didn't like axiomatic decision theory and voted with his feet. By that I mean von Neumann and Morgenstern and Savage and later things. He did early work in linear programming, the Hawkins-Simon condition. Look it up. He thought hard about induction, a very hard problem, influenced by Hume, which Hume didn't solve. He talked about linear quadratic dynamic models and how to do it, basically using linear algebra and matrix algebra. He was discoverer of the certainty equivalence principle in a famous paper. Well, that was a separation of decisions from forecasting. He separated those two things. In general, they don't separate, but he showed special conditions under which they did separate. He described it right, and these young MIT guys who do sequence space methods should go back and read and think hard about what he did and the conditions. He did theories of organization. Well, he thought, what's an organization? It's a group of people making decisions. Is it a team or a league or an army or a society? And has it organized? And all the issues you talked about, he was thinking hard about in very opinionated ways. He did not like, he knew optimization theory. The book by Modigliani, Holt, Muth, and Simon is all about applying decision theory to do a certain kind of practical operations through inventory management, manage firms. He was interested in industrial organization, size distributions of firms. I think he's one of the founders of behavioral economics. He distrusted maximizing models, or did he really? Kind of, you said so, and he talked about he distrusted statistics. I'll come back to that. He wrote about bounded rationality. And he had strong opinions. So I'm motivated by things I learned at Carnegie. By some of the same things, I wrote a book on macroeconomics and reality. I wrote a book called Bounded Rationality. I'll come back to that. I wrote a book, Bounded Rationality in Macroeconomics. I wrote that book. I got a letter from Simon saying, "You're out of your mind." And because what did I do? I replaced the agents in a Lucas-type model with a model who didn't know as much, with agents who didn't know as much, and had to use statistics, and backed off. And he said, "That's not what I meant by about rationality." Okay, that was fun. So that was Herb. Second person who was his co-author, it's kind of hard to imagine with that book, is Franco Modigliani. And they had big debates. And Modigliani did believe in optimizing models. He wrote an early paper in Rational Expectations. I'll come back to that. And they had big arguments. They were civil, but a lot came out of that. I'll come back. So what about Modigliani? He's one of the founders of modern macroeconomics. Where did that come from? Macroeconomics was invented by John Maynard Keynes. He wrote this book. You cannot read it. It's all in words, and it's full of bluffs. It's literary economics. It has insights, but so does the Bible. But it's not math, and it's not science. Okay. And guess what? To this day, people are asking, what did Keynes really mean? So in 1944, read about Modigliani's life. He's an immigrant from Italy. In 1945, he tried to make sense of Keynes, and what did he do? He formalized it. He converted it to n equations and n unknowns with simultaneous equations, and there were exogenous variables. There were things that were being determined, and he had concepts that he mapped the loose words in Keynes's thing into a set of mathematics. You could write it down, and now you could say if you could write that down, you could do statistics on it. You couldn't do statistics on Keynes. So he did that. Those were models that did not have rational expectations, but 10 years later, because of Morgenstern, he said there couldn't be rational expectations because of an infinite regress problem. Well, when Modigliani said, he formulated it as a fixed point problem because beliefs affect outcomes and outcomes affect beliefs, and it's infinite regress. What Modigliani, it's one of the first applications of Brouwer's fixed point theory in economics. So he wrote that down. So he was very big into micro foundations for macro models. He lived by it. Micro foundations for the demand for money, for the difficult statistical relations that are revealed by statistics and the failures of the Keynesian consumption function. Well, he wrote a life cycle model with a couple students here, which was revolutionary, and if you want to think about demographics and how that affects growth and interest rates, that's Modigliani, still to this day. Again, he wrote. He did optimal decision making based on control. Then he advanced into. He was a Renaissance man, like Simon, but he liked statistics, And he was going to use econometrics and statistics to estimate a big macroeconomic model and use it to give advice to the United States. And he built one of the big Fed MIT models. So and then the term structure of interest rate. He wrote something about the preferred habitat model. The most recent models, like Greenwood and Vianos, it's a preferred habitat model. And the reason it has a preferred habitat is the same reason Modigliani saw. So Modigliani wasn't here but I read everything Modigliani. And guess what? You can't read Keynes. You can read Modigliani. There's if-then things. Okay. Then the next person, Merton Miller, who I met, he wrote a famous paper with Modigliani, and you could tell he wrote it because he was teaching MBAs. And it was about, like in those days, it was about, well, what's a big problem for a firm? How should it finance itself? Should it issue debt or equity? If it issues debt or equity, what kind? There were all sorts of books that said it should depend on a whole bunch of stuff and circumstances. And they wrote down a formal, it's a kind of a class of models, and they wrote down conditions, benchmark conditions that the other guys were assuming, and it turned out it's irrelevant. On the basis of, if you formally wrote down the math behind what these other guys were assuming, it doesn't matter. Don't worry about it. Debt or equity, it doesn't matter. And it's because of like some competition and taking into account what the guys who are buying your debt or equity, what they can do. And the so-called Modigliani-Miller theorem. And then Miller, on his own, goes out and he says, well, people think it does matter. So what must be in their heads? Now he's using, look what side he's on. He's not on the Simon suspicious of optimizing there. I'm going to rationalize. I got to figure out an environment that rationalizes why they care. First thing he puts on is taxes. Debt and equity are taxed differently. That's something our president of the United States knows. Even though he doesn't seem to know as much about another tax called a tariff. Okay, so he talked about things that make it real. And then then guess what? So that theorem is just about government finance, but now here's a Carnegie thing. There's somebody else. Other people finance themselves. Universities finance it, and governments finance themselves. And then James Tobin, who was working about how government should finance itself, he should have read Modigliani-Miller, and he could have done a lot with it. He didn't. Dismissed it, kind of. Neil Walsh read it, and he got Modigliani-Miller theorems for government finance that opened up a whole bunch of stuff about. Anyway, so that's Merton Miller. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about. I've solved the problem of not being able to use the slide clicker properly. Okay, so the next thing is I'm going to talk about. Holder talked about. I'm going to talk about. Lucas and Prescott. I'm going to talk about most of them as a pair. Why? Okay, it says something about Carnegie, because I knew both of those guys well. It's a kind of interesting. One had the gift of language, Robert Lucas. He wrote and spoke. He spoke like a poet, and he wrote like a novelist, if you read him. He's very gifted. Prescott is basically... he's completely inarticulate, okay? But those two guys could talk to each other, okay? And Prescott was a graduate student here, and I'm pretty sure that it's Prescott who came with an OR master's degree from Case Western. He knew Markov chains, and he knew better than Lucas, and he knew dynamic programming. I don't think Lucas did. I can kind of prove it. Lucas was doing some deterministic continuous time control, and those two guys got together. I could document it. And together they created applications of dynamic programming in macroeconomics. Okay, so kind of what are they onto? They're onto some stuff. They were getting this from something Simon Okay, Modigliani was onto, but Simon didn't kind of like about satisficing. It's about competition. Competition. And if you have, what's competition on steroids? It's the Arrow de Meaux model. It's a complete market, general competitive equilibrium. This is the intellectual descendant of Alra, who set up the problem, didn't completely solve it. Hicks and Arrow de Meaux did. And it's a very general model of an economy where there's a market, okay? Now you can ask, what kind of market? Think about clearing systems. Okay, it's an economy that's dynamic, it's random, it moves through time. There's as many people as you want. You can have a continuum like Ali today. You could have many people, and then you have a competitive equilibrium, which is you could have a dictator or you could have a competitive equilibrium. A competitive equilibrium is there's just a bunch of prices, and there's individuals, and the individuals are one budget constraint. They say they trade all imaginable derivatives you can want. Where's there a market? There's one market in one place at one time at the beginning of time. It's centralized at time zero, and there's a vast clearing. There's a vast clearinghouse. How many? You only need one. And there's a Walrasian auctioneer who clears that thing. He's outside. That's what it is. That's the vision. And by the way, that is the base model of finance. Okay, so that was there. That was viewed as pure theory. Okay, and so what are guys like Lucas and Prescott even looking at that from? Well, because they were at Carnegie, and they thought, well, that was a model. What did it determine? It determined stochastic processes. It determined distributions of people's consumption over time. And they were macroeconomists, and they wanted heterogeneous agent models. There's no dynamic programming. There's no probabilities in Arrow de Meaux. It's much more general than that. There's just preferences. So what Lucas and Prescott did, and they specialized Arrow de Meaux to recursive environments where there's competition and continuum of agents. Okay, and it was mathematically beautiful. Prescott used to carry Rudin, real analysis around with him under his pocket, and Lucas did too after a while. So that's what they created, and then they created what I like to call equilibrium Markov models. Those are the 1987 Lucas's 1982 business cycle. The first chapter, it's your field. You can say macro. It's a equilibrium Markov model. It's an IO model. So is he doing macro or micro or IO? All of above, in one unified way. Kind of that came through in Holger's thing. So they created recursive competitive equilibrium, and they showed how to do it. Now, they did something throughout. They used rational expectations. And that is a version of communism. I'll characterize it differently. It's communism. Because what they did is, again, Simon's involved, and they're turning their back on Simon. By the way, you think Simon didn't notice that? He did. And he let him know. Politely, he let him know. Okay, so Lucas do is not Arrow de Meaux. They're going to have expected utility. It's Carnegie preferences, summation beta to the t u of ct with an expectation on top. So there's an expected utility, and now Muth comes in. Okay, and Lucas. Muth was an assistant professor here, a student here, an assistant professor here, a student of Modigliani and Simon, and you could see what he learned. He watched this debate between Modigliani and Simon, and he did something with it. By the way, they were doing something else that was modern. Because of this debate, there were guys, graduate students here, who were saying, well, these old guys are having these debates. The old guys were Ariel's age, having these debates. Why don't we go look at some data? So they started collecting data on expectations and forecasts. And they did beautiful work in the late 50s and 60s. It's coming back. That started here. Muth knew about that. Muth maybe did some of it, okay? And that got Muth to systematize rational expectations. Okay, so that's all going on. So when I say communism, there's a bunch of people in these models, as many as you want. And now the question is, these are models. Lucas and Prescott's they're models of people who themselves have models. And so what do I mean by a model? I mean what a model is, it's a joint probability distribution over a sequence. They're building statistical models of people, each of whom has a model, a joint probability distribution over a sequence. Okay, so you have a continuum and a rational. Okay, so I haven't mentioned rational expectations. Democracy, everybody has his own beliefs. Why not? Aaron DeBrew would say everybody has his own belief if they're going to do it. Heterogeneous beliefs. And what Lucas and Prescott said, no, communism. Everybody's going to have exactly the same joint probability. They're going to have the same subjective joint probability over beliefs. They're going to have the same as several people. And, Prescott and Hodrick and various people are going to come in. And they're going to have the same beliefs as everybody else in the model builder, and God. Or nature. You need all of those to justify rational expectations econometrics, and you need all of those to justify the Lucas critique. That's what Lucas is doing. So it's communism. Why? Okay, it is kind of related to a comment you made. Why? Because Lucas said, beware of theorists bearing free parameters. It's to restrict, it's to reduce the dimensionality of the parameter space. And that, by the way, that's what they do in neural nets. They restrict them like anything. And there's a race. So it's a vast restriction. And that is used throughout Holger's work. It's used throughout I.O. And it's a kind of communism. And it simplifies things by reducing parameters. Okay, so finally, so now I'm going to keep going. Next guy. There's much more to say about Lucas and Prescott. But Finn Kidlin, who's a student of Prescott, and apparently Holger's teachers, one of his teachers. So what did he do? He couldn't have done anything he did without rational expectations. It was key that he had rational expectation. Go back and try to read Kidlin's papers. He did something important. And what he saw is he's going to rework optimal taxation problems or optimal monetary policy problems in a rational expectations model. And Kidlin knew dynamic programming, looks at this problem, and immediately says, this does not fit dynamic programming. It's what chemical engineers called a non-serial problem. It's not recursive. It's like the simultaneity goes both ways. It's a so-called non-serial problem. And on the basis of that, he wrote one of the first two papers about time inconsistency. Optimal plans, when you solve a Ramsey problem, the optimal plan, you do not solve it by ordinary dynamic program. Well, you just solve it no holds barred machine learning. You solve an open loop and you get a sequence. And it has a structure which Finn learned a lot about. It's a Stockelberg game where there's a leader times zero and a bunch of followers. And then it turned out Prescott saw it, he says, wow, this means dynamic programming is dead. You can't use dynamic programming in macro. And he actually, he wrote a paper on that, okay? Not without Finn. Okay, so what Finn does is, I didn't see him do it, but 4 years later, Finn comes back and he and Prescott in a 1980 paper, not in a top 5 journal. I'll say, I hate top 5. Don't pay any attention to top 5. Okay, it doesn't mean it. They wrote in a bottom 5 journal. I had a paper in there too with Lars Hansen. Okay. And what it is what they showed, they invented something, I call it dynamic programming squared. They showed how to, if you used the planner's Bellman equation, had as a state variable the value function from another Bellman equation. And Okay, that's what Kydland did. It opened up all sorts of things. It's not all Kydland did. In the tradition of Modigliani, he built one of the most beautiful modern models of the man for money, an Alan Meltzer descendant. You know, this is a center for estimating the demand and supply of money. I'd say Kydland had one of the state-of-the-art things. It has both. It has the margin of why do you want cash or do you want deposits? Kind of a big deal, especially now. Okay. Then the next person is. It's the reason I ever got to Carnegie. My benefactor, Oliver Williamson, I was his RA. He did, I don't know, he was an IO guy, organizational, he was about the theory of the firm. He thought hard about what's a firm and what's a market, which what's a market? Well, first thing, it involves prices that are somehow set. Well, here, I'm way behind in how you set prices, and I'm even further behind after I went to the seminar. There's different ways you can set prices, but somehow you set prices and you let people trade at them. The competitive equilibrium, okay. So you have prices and you decentralize, or you have a command economy. So there's something called the welfare theorems, okay, that go back to Aaron DeBrew. Aaron DeBrew, their math says it makes no difference. It makes no difference whether you have a dictator or you have competitive. That's what the welfare theorems say. Same allocation. And so then what the theory of the firm starts by, well, should we all just be one big firm, army and so on, and just have no prices, it's commands. You get orders and you do what, Stalin tells you. That's it. And the pyramid. So people like Coase and other people thought about, well, what's a firm? And that's so Oliver Williamson, he's a Sargent student. He takes that and he, started talking. Well, sometimes it's good to decentralize and sometimes not. And transactions costs, organizational capital, and that was in the air here. Prescott got involved. Lucas did work on this. Okay, so talk about interdisciplinary. Okay, so what determines lines between firms? Okay, you think about that. Organizationally, why is there a Fed versus the Treasury? Guess what? For the first 125 years of this country, of the United States, there was no Fed. The Congress did monetary policy day by day, and in some ways it worked better. Okay, so why was the Fed invented? So that's organizational behavior. Williamson has a lot to say about that, and I was in contact with, after I left here, I was in the U.S. Army, and I was in contact with Williamson, and he had a paper about defense contracts, which that was great. And another thing is he pointed me toward those learning curves. Okay, Wall Street Journal today, there's an article about how we make ships. We don't exploit those learning curves to this day. Anyway, okay, so that's Oliver Williamson. Okay, so let me just go on. Dale Mortensen, I'll come back. So he was a student here, and you can tell, he was, okay, here's why. Here's what Dale Mortensen, I mentioned the Arrow DeBrew model. I mentioned kind of the standard macro model that Lucas and Prescott and Kydland have. That model, it's a model Lucas stuck to the end. Okay, he thought it was the best model. There's labor supply and there's labor demand, and they intersect, and that market clears every day. Okay, there are no jobs. There are no jobs. There's labor. There's a market every day. There's homogeneous types of labor, but there's no relationships. What a job is, it's an enduring relationship. There are no enduring relationships in that model. Okay, what Mortensen said, well, out there are. So there's something wrong with the model. So he built a model. So in this leading model, it's, by the way, it's in every Kydland Prescott real business cycle model, many models, I hate to say it, new Keynesian models, there's no jobs, okay? So he built a model with jobs. So there's no marriages. So now what's the difference between a job and a marriage? And abstractly, because the math, it's just X and Y. You could call it. So what you do is you have to search for a partner, and it takes a while. And not how are you going to model that? He had a clever way of modeling it. You sit in a matching function, and there's random arrivals. Okay, so he built a model of not the marriage market, but the labor market, and now there's vacancies and unemployment, which there's not in the Kidlin-Prescott model, and there's data on that. There's something called a Beveridge curve. So he talked about a way to do that. So this remains today a leading. It's not the only model. It's controversial because of the way he did it. But he opened up jobs. And then finally, in some sense, I'm going to talk about Lars Hansen. Holger talked about him. So what he did? So Lucas wrote a paper say everything the way we were doing econometrics before was wrong because it didn't build in rational expectations. Okay, and he said someone should figure that out, but it's hard. Okay, Lars basically figured it out, leading to a pair of papers that year. There were two papers. One was doing it with a complete model. There's two Hansen Singleton they were done here models, and what they were doing is they were testing. This is it's Carnegie, because Lucas had written the fundamental Lucas asset pricing model in '78, which was a model of a stochastic discount factor that you could use it to price anything. He used it to price stocks, and it turned out it was a special case of something Harrison and Krebs did. Harrison's a great economist who got an OR degree. He's an OR economist, okay, and had one fundamental equation of asset pricing: E of M times R equals 1. Lucas had a special M, it's stochastic, and E is an expectation, and rational expectations. And what Lucas had this prediction. It was a really hot paper. Hansen and Singleton set out to test it, and guess what? You said the estimated parameter. You said it was beautiful. Lucas didn't think it was beautiful at first. It blew his model out of the water. The maximum likelihood estimates of the model say, the likelihood ratio. It's like astronomical. You say macro data don't reject hypothesis? Yes, they did. They rejected this so much that Lucas, the author of the Lucas asset pricing model, abandoned it. That model and Lucas was an orphan. Because when Lucas went on to evaluate the welfare cost of business cycles, he abandoned that asset pricing model. And so then Lucas, but Lars didn't stop there. He said, why didn't it work? Well, there must be something wrong with the equation E of MR equals 1. Okay, so basically what's wrong is the M, the stochastic discount factor. So now he said, he did something very clever, and he was influenced by. I'm going to get to entrepreneurship in a minute. I'm going to quit in a minute. What he basically said is, well, maybe you can find out. This is reverse engineering, another Carnegie idea. Maybe I can find an M that will make it work. Actually, without telling you what the M is. After all, stochastic discount factor is just a random variable. So maybe I can. And Holger, you said you don't have to run regressions anymore. That's all Hansen and Singleton were doing. Because E of MR equals 1, that's a regression. Okay, so what he did is they reverse engineered a class of stochastic discount factors that would satisfy that equation. And it turns out it's a class, it's a set of random variables, and this is the birth of the Hansen-Jaganathan bounds. So if a graduate student at Carnegie or anywhere comes in and they say, I have a great stochastic discount factor, the first thing you say, show me it's inside the Hansen-Jaganathan bounds. So then what Lars is motivated by, you kind of see, is he starts doing econometrics where Remember I said rational expectations. Everybody, this communism, everybody knows the model and trusts it inside the model, including the econometrician. Lars said, suppose somebody doesn't trust the model. Where did you get that from? OR. It's robust dynamic programming or robust control theory, where you have a model, but you suspect it's wrong. And what you want to do is you want to surround the model you have with a set of other models, a probability set of other models, and you want to get a decision rule. Okay, we come back to Herb Simon. Optimum? Well, if you have an optimum, you have to have a unique optimum problem. So you have to have objective function and a constraint set. Your constraint set has to include a probability law. If I say, I won't tell you the probability law, I'll just tell you a set. I'll tell you, I can't get you an optimum. But what you can get is I can tell you, well, I can give you sets of value functions that are associated with given decision rules. And then what Lars is into is designing the decision rule so that the set of value functions behaves in a way that you can trust. This is how you hope people design bridges. Okay. So where does this come back? This loops back to Frank Knight and what entrepreneurs do. So the question is, entrepreneurship. What do entrepreneurs do? What do they do? So what Frank Knight said is it that they take risk? And by risk he meant what we teach. They don't know the outcome, but they know the probability distribution. So they do expected utility. Frank Knight said that's not what entrepreneurs do, because they do stuff where they don't know what the probability distribution is. So he called that uncertainty. There's no math in Frank Knight's book, and he didn't know how to get any farther, but that was an insight. Schumpeter had the same idea. Didn't know how to. Well, Lars kind of figured out how to mathematize that using robust decision theory. So it's like you make decisions and you design rules with sets of probabilities, and it's so this gets into deep things about how you represent ignorance, and that it sets up a collision course with Bayesians because I'll just stop this. This loops back to Carnegie. Why? Because Sire, you're interested in decision theory? We need a statistical decision theory. He hired de Groot, who wrote this a great book, and so Lars goes way beyond that. So you don't trust any of those models. What do you do? Okay, so now, how does Lars apply this? He applies it to asset prices and stock prices, and he has a market price of uncertainty. So why am I talking about that right now when what's going on in the newspaper? Well, okay, so it's appropriate now. And then he applies it to climate change. Because if you actually go and look at the climate change literature, where there's a lot of serious climate scientists look at things, the models are all over the place about the dynamics, and about the dynamics that you want to hand to a policymaker who's going to make decisions about, costs and prospective damages. So what Lars wants to do this is taking into account of the model uncertainty. So, okay, so those are some of the, those are some of the things I learned from the people who are here. I didn't even start telling you about the people who are here now. And what I realize now, except for Lars, almost everything I talked about, and kind of learned about, is inside the frontier now, of what, like the seminar I was going to, and like I'll give you a little example. I was talking to he's a graduate student who working in the area, like, what's a market? Okay, well, Valrao would say it's a place where we all get together and exchange stuff. So, and what this student, Chen, was showing me is like what a market is. It's a it's a little algorithm that's inside of a blockchain that allows certain trades of packages to be affected according to a protocol. It's a routine. Then so it's a computer algorithm inside a blockchain that everyone knows, and that's a market inside, this thing. So it's not that's like, is this what is this? Is this as interdisciplinary as anything? It's math. It's lots of people want to make money from blockchains. It's things that central banks should be concerned about because it's settlement systems so I feel lucky I was here, when I was 23, and my PhD is really from Carnegie. The papers I wrote was from Carnegie. The faculty members who advised me were from Carnegie, but my thesis wasn't good enough to get a Carnegie PhD, but I'm really grateful, and I'm thinking there's some graduate students here who are, they're 23, and when they're standing up here when they're my age, it's going to be amazing. I'm just saying, what you're learning is going to be inside the frontier because of the stuff you're doing, and this is a great university. Thanks.
This is just amazing. So it's a fantastic place, and we cannot think about a better speaker to represent that. Thank you so much, Dr. Sargent. At this point, I think we need to skip the Q&A because we need to start the parallel sessions. But Dr. Sargent is going to be around, and I'm sure that you'll all be able to take the opportunity to talk to him. What we'd like to do now is President Jahanian, please, can you please join me? As I mentioned, the Tepper School is home to 10 Nobel Laureates in economics whose portraits we proudly display in the building. And today, we'd like to honor Dr. Sargent and have him join that gallery. Can you please come? Yes. So there's only minus 1 minute to go to the parallel sessions. I'd like to invite all of you to please proceed. And we have some volunteers outside to help you find your way.